If you ask 10 people how the US government actually works, you're going to get 10 half right answers. Maybe. Well, today I'm going to break down the big picture simply. What's the purpose of the three-pronged government system we have, plus how those various agencies all fit together. By the end, you'll understand who does what and how the checks and balance system does its best to keep total chaos at bay. First, let's differentiate between our state and federal governments. State governments deal with people in that state only. Each state has its own laws, and those laws deal with the day-to-day life of its citizens. So they do things like minimum wage, and they fund public education, and they issue marriage licenses, and they develop their own vehicle codes. They have their own criminal laws and courts, and they have their own public infrastructure like highways and public transit. But all of those things affect only the citizens of that state and visitors of the state. The federal government deals with national and cross-state matters. So they manage things like Social Security, medical care, and veterans benefits. They enforce federal laws like our Civil Rights Code and the immigration. They regulate interstate commerce like air travel and trains, and they deal with the national military. They set broad policies on things like environmental protection and public health. While less visible day to day, federal actions shape major aspects like our economic policy, national security, and civil rights. Okay, quick history lesson. The United States government didn't just spring up overnight. There were ships crossing the ocean, colonization, people throwing tea into harbors, and a couple of wars. Back in 1776, trying to find a way to create a country out of a bunch of people spread out over a good chunk of land, the colonies tried something called the Articles of Confederation, and it ended up having all the structural integrity of a house of cards in a hurricane.
Is that how you spell Confederation?
I think so, possibly. The E goes before the R, yes?
Gentlemen, the man.
By 1789, the founders said, well, that was a disaster, and they scrapped it for our Constitution, the single founding document that's still running the show today. It's been tweaked with 27 amendments and centuries of, wait, why didn't we think of that moments? But those core three branches, they're straight from the 1789 blueprint, battle-tested for over 235 years, and somehow still standing. The United States Constitution sets up the federal government with three overseeing bodies: the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. I'm going to explain each of them. The legislative branch, that's Congress. They make our laws. The executive branch is led by the president, and they oversee federal agencies, enforce federal regulations, they conduct foreign policy, and they ensure that federal laws enacted by Congress are executed. The judicial branch is led by the Supreme Court, and they interpret laws and decide if they're constitutional. Each branch has specific ways to limit or check the others in order to keep the distribution of power even between the three. That phrase, checks and balances, is going to come up a lot. It's like a never-ending game of governmental rock, paper, scissors, designed so no single branch can be more powerful than the others. The founders were basically saying, we don't trust anyone with too much power, not even politicians. In today's political climate, you might notice that the balance sometimes feels, well, unbalanced. Different branches can appear to have more power at different times, depending on the current events and political dynamics. But the system is designed to be self-correcting over time, so even when it feels like one branch is dominating the headlines, there's light at the end of the tunnel. Let's start with Congress. Congress is responsible for making laws and representing the American people. It's composed of two chambers designed to work very differently. The House of Representatives is based on state population. California has 52 representatives, while Wyoming has 1. Alaska, the largest state by land, also has 1, while Rhode Island, our smallest state, has 2. The House of Representatives serves 2-year terms, which keeps them closely tied to their voters and constantly running for re-election. The Senate, which is the other chamber, is based on equal representation, Every state gets 2 senators, period. Senators serve 6-year terms and are expected to take a longer view over political action. What Congress doesn't have are term limits. Both chambers can be reelected indefinitely, and many serve for decades. That feeds into ongoing concerns about the age of the people representing the American people. Some members serve well into their 70s, 80s, and beyond. Supporters value institutional memory, while critics worry about health, cognitive decline, and long-term decision-making. It's a hard question. How do you balance experience with accountability when state elections are the primary safeguard? Let me give you an overview of what Congress does. They have sole authority to create, amend, or repeal federal laws. They can levy taxes, borrow money, and regulate interstate and foreign commerce. They can declare war. They establish federal courts and agencies. They must ratify treaties. They confirm presidential appointments, including cabinet members, federal judges, and ambassadors. And finally, they are responsible for impeachment. The House of Representatives has the power to initiate impeachment of federal officials, including the president. They start the ball rolling, but the Senate holds the trial and votes on removal from office, requiring a 2/3 majority. The most crucial role of Congress in our government is creation of federal laws. Here's how it works. A bill is a written proposal for a new law or amendment to an existing law. They can be introduced by either the House or the Senate. Once introduced, the proposal has to go through a detailed process, reviewed by committees, debated in their own chamber, and then voted on until it passes. Then it goes to the opposite chamber. It has to be approved with the exact same language in both chambers. Honestly, it's amazing anything ever becomes law. Then the president has to sign it into law or veto it. If he signs it, it becomes law immediately. If he doesn't, then it's sent back to Congress within 10 days, and they explain their objections, and that's called a veto. When people think of the executive branch, they picture the White House and the president, but the president is not the whole operation, not even close. As its core, the president's job is to make sure Congress's laws actually happen in the real world. They say the president runs the country primarily because in practice, the president has become the central focus of national leadership and policy direction. Congress often fails to pass detailed legislation, instead passing broad laws that delegate rulemaking to executive agencies. The delegation of authority allows the president to shape policy through regulations and executive action because the president oversees those agencies. This is especially true when Congress is gridlocked. The president's main staff is part of the Executive Office of the President, the EOP, which includes several key appointed roles. You hear most about people like the Chief of Staff or the National Security Advisor or Homeland Security Advisor. But the rest are just as important. You just only hear about them when something goes wrong. The public face of the White House, aside from the president, is often the press secretary. Their job is to manage communication with the media and explain what the administration is doing, or at least attempting to. For over a century, access to the president in tight spaces like the Oval Office or Air Force One was managed by the White House Correspondents Association. But in early 2025, that control shifted directly to the administration. A good example of how executive procedures change with each presidency and how those choices tend to swing back and forth over time. I'm not dealing with political parties here, but if you want me to do a video on them, leave me a comment. And while you're there, if you could help me out and leave me a like, I'd appreciate that as well. Let's move on to the presidential cabinet. They're not a part of the executive office staff, but they head the 15 major departments that are part of the executive. The Department of State handles foreign affairs. Department of the Treasury handles federal finances and taxation. Department of Defense oversees the military and the national security. Department of Justice enforces federal laws, and the Attorney General is at its head. Department of the Interior manages natural resources, public lands, and Native American affairs. The Department of Agriculture regulates food production, farming, and rural development. Department of Commerce promotes economic growth and trade and technological advances. Department of Labor protects workers' rights and oversees employment standards. The Department of Health and Human Services administers health programs like Medicare and Medicaid and public health initiatives. The Department of Housing and Urban Development addresses housing needs and urban development. Department of Transportation ensures safe and effective transportation systems. Department of Energy manages energy policy like nuclear security and energy research. Department of Education supports public education and federal student aid. Department of Veteran Affairs provides services and benefits to military veterans. And finally, the Department of Homeland Security leads efforts in national security, border control, and disaster response. These departments interact with state governments and citizens primarily through funding, some regulation, and service delivery, operating within the framework of U.S. federalism. I can tell you that my house was hit by a tornado, and I dealt with FEMA, which is one of the governmental agencies that helps states out during disasters. Presidents are elected for 4 years. The 22nd Amendment to the United States Constitution established that no person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. This applies regardless of whether the terms are consecutive. One of the challenges of all of these policies is that every 4 to 8 years, most of the EOP and much of the cabinet can be replaced when a new president takes office. A president can appoint nearly anyone, qualified or not. Let's talk about presidential powers, and there are many. While he's charged with enforcing federal laws enacted by Congress, the president also has the power to issue executive orders. These are formal instructions to carry out the force of law without going through Congress. They tell federal agencies how to implement laws or respond to emergencies, but they're not permanent. Any president can undo the executive orders of a previous president. You might be wondering where checks and balances comes in. Well, try to follow this. Congress passes bills, but the president can veto them. However, Congress can override that veto with a 2/3 majority in both chambers, which is really hard to get, so it doesn't happen often. Oh, and if that doesn't work, Congress can file lawsuits in federal court against the president regarding legislation or what is called presidential overreach. That's basically when they say the president is doing something beyond what their power covers. Now, Congress also controls the federal budget. No money, no mission, and that affects everyone. In 2024, they managed a $1.8 trillion deficit. That's 6.4% of the GDP. The GDP is the gross domestic product, or the total value of all goods and services produced in the United States. For perspective, that's like if your budget every month was $1,000, but you spent $1,640 every month and just kept doing it. Your credit card would like a word. Congress can fund or defund programs, effectively controlling what the executive branch can actually do. So if you think the president is powerful, just remember that Congress holds the purse strings. Now, the judicial branch might seem like the quiet kid in the corner, but it packs a serious punch. The judiciary refers to the federal court system, which is different from state courts. Federal court system only handles cases arising under the Constitution or federal laws. At its lowest level, there are 94 federal judicial districts across the United States. They're the first level where a case is tried. Directly below the Supreme Court, there are 12 appellate courts. They handle appeals from cases tried at the lowest level or the district court level. Then at the very top is the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court serves as the final court of appeal. Its primary purpose is to interpret the United States Constitution and ensure that laws and governments comply with it. They also handle disputes between 2 or more states, cases involving ambassadors or public ministers or consuls, and they handle cases where the state is a party against a citizen of another state or a foreign country. Not every case filed in the United States can be taken to the Supreme Court. It has to cover an issue of the Constitution or federal laws, and it has to go through the district and appellate courts of the federal system first. The court receives approximately 7 to 10,000 petitions each year, but only hears about 70 to 85 cases annually, which is less than 1% of the petitions. If a petition or case is denied, then the lower court's decision stands. Cases are typically selected when they involve national significance, constitutional questions, or conflicting rulings among lower courts. As an aside, did you know there's a basketball court on the 5th floor of the United States Supreme Court building, which is directly above the main court building on the 4th floor?
Here we go. Stay with her. Stay with her.
Right here, right here.
Coming to you. Got it. Case closed.
Oh, that's good. Nice bucket.
Court is adjourned.
It's famously nicknamed the highest court in the land. The Supreme Court's superpower is judicial review, the ability to say, nope, that violates the Constitution. The power isn't written into the Constitution, interestingly. They gave themselves this authority in the 1903 case called Marbury v. Madison. Something you may not know is that federal judges are not elected, not one of them, and they serve as long as they want to or until they die. This lifetime tenure applies to judges at all levels of the federal court system, from district courts to the Supreme Court. The president nominates federal judges, and Senate has to confirm them. Those hearings can get intense. As for checks and balances affecting the Supreme Court can strike down laws or executive actions that violate the Constitution, including actions of the president. But Congress then can respond by changing laws or proposing constitutional amendments. For the record, an amendment requires a 2/3 vote of both chambers plus approval by 3/4 of the state legislature, making it roughly as easy as getting 50 cats to march in formation. There have been 27 amendments. 27 in 235 years. Like it or not, the United States government can be messy. It's slow and sometimes frustrating, but that is the way it was set up. The system is designed to make it hard for any one person or group to make dramatic changes quickly. It's not perfect and it's not always fast, but it's designed to be stable and prevent any one person or group from having too much power. One last thing I'd like to mention about our government. When the American government was designed, who got to participate in it was extremely limited, on purpose. By and large, the founding fathers didn't trust the average man with the fate of our country, never mind women or people of color. For most of U.S. history, Congress was overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly male, and overwhelmingly wealthy. It still is. That design wasn't an accident. It was baked into who was allowed to vote, run, and be taken seriously. Today, Congress is far from perfectly representative, but it looks very different than it did even 50 years ago. Roughly 1/4 of the members are women, and 25% are people of color. So when people say the system was designed to work this way, the real question is, designed for whom? Because the structure, the checks, the balances, the guardrails, they've stayed the same. What's changed slowly and unevenly was who was finally allowed to use it. And if you want to change who gets to sit at that table, the most powerful tool most people have is participation, especially voting. Because systems don't shift on their own, people move them. So there's your crash course. If you'd like me to dive deeper into anything I covered, or if I didn't cover something well, please let me know in the comments. There's always more rabbit holes to explore, and I'm ready to dive in.